Hello again to everyone who's joining again, and hello to folks who are coming in who weren't in yesterday. I want to say, first of all, just thank you again to IJS for bringing me in. I know this is in the family of things that, are normally part of the daily sit, and also a little bit different, bringing in, some more of the movement practices and different elements. And so I appreciate IJS and appreciate all of you, especially if you were here yesterday and then came back. That's a good sign to me because it says, all right, you're at least curious about doing some more. So it's good to be back with everyone. Again, I'm Yoshi Silverstein, he, him pronouns. And this week as Rabbi Josh said, we are doing this little mini series of Jewish embodiment and Jewish embodied practice with this focus on renewal and fortification for the new year. One, just in general, this is a time of year, I think Jewish wisdom, so much of Jewish wisdom is really grounded and reflected in the Jewish or the Hebrew calendar and the ways in which that really aligns with cycles of nature and the different seasons, which depending where you live. I live in Cleveland, and there are very much at least 4 different seasons. If you live in Southern California, maybe not so much. But we also experience this in our bodies, right? And so the more that we sort of align our bodies with the flow of what's happening in nature around us, as well as inside of us, there's interesting things that can happen. And so we're tapping into that wisdom. We are primarily using embodied practices of movement and breath work this week. I want to say two things. One is, and I said this yesterday, just a note on accessibility. As with yesterday, I'll be showing everything from both standing and from seated positions, and you're welcome to do either and also both. You can switch back and forth if for any reason, if you want to start with one and then you feel like moving to the other. So I'll show from both standing and seated. And the other thing I wanted to say really briefly before we jump in further, is also this week I'm focusing more on sort of open movement, sort of like tools and practices that we can use, with the idea that these are both sort of rooted in Jewish wisdom or playing with Jewish wisdom, and also are meant to be applicable to lots of different movement practices, as opposed to more specific or particular forms that are within a specific style of movement, for example, right? So we can think about the difference of specific yoga postures as one example, right? That have sort of a particular form, versus, this idea yesterday, we play with the idea of rootedness, which is applicable to lots and lots of different practices. And so we're playing sort of more openly. In some of our other studio work, which I'll say more about at the end, we do both some of the open stuff and also are going more kind of in depth with more particular forms that are grounded in and applying Jewish wisdom and ideas. So I wanted to just give a quick note on that. So this week, in addition to generally sort of thinking about connecting with nature, we're also using this metaphor of trees to sort of give a little bit of context to the practice. And the kind of 2 main ideas that we're playing with there in terms of how that relates to Jewish wisdom. The first is we have this source text that we can pop in the chat. Ki adam etz hasadeh, is the human like a tree of the field. Like I said yesterday, there's many different interpretations of that, right? As with most Jewish texts. One of them is saying humans have a lot in common with trees. And we can learn from sort of thinking about the ways in which we might be like trees or emulate trees. So we're playing with that idea. And then the other one is this idea of Torah is often called Eitz Chaim, which is a tree of life. I think Torah is also Eitz Hada'at, the tree of knowledge. That's kind of obvious that Torah is full of knowledge, right? And the Torah is also full of life. The same is true of us in our bodies. Our bodies are sources of knowledge and sources of life. So if we think about our bodies as Eitzim, as trees of life, trees of knowledge, we're also tapping into the Torah that we hold in our bodies and that we can explore and discover through our bodies. So those are the metaphors that we're playing with this week. And with that, I want to get into today's practice. So a quick review. Yesterday, so review for folks who are with us, and a very little bit, for those who were not, we looked at this practice of rooting or rootedness, right? So obviously trees have roots. It's very important for the trees to both keep them, sturdy and stable in the ground, and of course, be pulling in nutrients, water, etc., from the soil. So we played with sort of this idea of static rooting, of like, how do we really connect with the earth, feel the way that the earth and gravity both pulls us down and holds us up. We played a little bit with dynamic rooting, so staying rooted, but shifting the weight from side to side, and then doing some direction change, walking around, sort of keeping that sense of rootedness as we were sort of in movement. And then bringing that into this idea of, okay, now how do I feel that sense of connection both to the earth and from one part of the body to the next, even when I'm moving like my fingertips, which are like the farthest points of my body from the earth. How can I still feel that sense of connection throughout the body? And then we did a little bit of improv with some music and a brief few sort of hums to close us out. So that's what we did yesterday. And if you, so I'm going to invite folks who are in that practice to bring all of that in today. We're not leaving it behind, we're building off of it. And if you weren't with us yesterday, you can still kind of like play with that as we're going. So today's framing is we're going from the roots to now looking at the bark and the heartwood of the tree. So these sort of two sturdiness elements. So the bark, of course, is the external sort of protective layer. And then the heartwood is that center core that really provides that like inner strength of the tree. And so we want to sort of play with what is that for our bodies, to both that protective external layer, as well as, and then moving into that sort of inner core sense of strength and our sense of self that kind of holds us and keeps us sturdy as we move through life. Okay, so with that, let's get into practice. And, I might actually just keep this camera. Oh, no, I'm going to switch. Okay, hopefully this works. Okay. All right. So for our first practice, and again, we can do all of these from either a seated or a standing position. So we'll actually start seated here. So for this first one, we're going to do sort of this may not be the name that lasts forever. I'm calling these bark bites. But basically we're playing with that bark, the external surface, which is our skin, right? And so for this, we want to start to bring some attention and awareness to the skin. Obviously, it's always there, but we're not always bringing our attention to it. So we can start off just with a little bit of light sort of rubbing, taking one hand and just sort of moving it across the skin. Start with the arms and really go chest, belly, legs, kind of go wherever compels you. And just notice, I'm just like remembering, giving a little physical sensation to be like, oh yeah, that's where my skin is there. Here's where it feels like there. And start to just notice like, what's the quality of the skin? Obviously, a lot of it's covered in clothes, but where does the skin feel soft? Where do we have sort of like bony areas that we're feeling, right? Are there rough spots? Is there anywhere that's feeling tender right now? So we're just kind of noticing that. And now we're going to move from this into some somewhere on the range of gentle to firm. That's up to you. But some just sort of like patting or slapping, right? Start gentle. We're not trying to hurt ourselves, but kind of give it enough that you're feeling just a little bit of that, like, that slapping sensation. And if this feels good, the level you're at, great, keep it right there. And if you want to give it a little bit more, that's kind of feeling like, ooh, that's kind of feeling like it's waking things up, right? That's great too. But choose the right amount. And again, we're using this to bring that awareness to, this is this outer surface of the body. And this kind of allows me to feel a little bit more with more attention. You can like kind of pause every couple moments and kind of feel like, ooh, there's maybe a little bit of that light little buzz, right? That tingle, when I slapped it, like, ooh, I'm feeling right there a little bit more. Oh yeah, maybe there's a little blood flow that's coming. All right. So take, I don't know, 10, 15 more seconds. If there's just anywhere that you kind of want to give a little more slapping or rubbing, just to kind of wake things up. Again, feeling that outside layer, this bark of the body. And then let's just take a moment, take a couple of breaths and just do kind of an overall body scan and notice with a focus on that, on the skin, on the outside layer, like, how's that bark feeling now? Are there areas that feel a little bit maybe more ready, right? If there was like a harsh wind that came, does it feel a little more ready? Or maybe things that feel less ready, you want to protect those parts. And so this is the bark, right? This is that outer surface of our bodies. And everything in our body is highly adaptable within reason, of course. So if this is the first time ever or the first time in a long time that you've done something like this, it might feel pretty tender, right? But this is the kind of thing that actually you can kind of build up some tolerance to, right, in ways that can actually kind of strengthen that outer layer a little bit. So that's what we're going to do on bark today. Now I want to move into more of that internal heartwood work, because that's going to really be the core of what we're going to focus on today. So here we're going to now start off with really trying to find center. I'm going to start this from seated and then I'll show it in standing as well. So now that heartwood, again, that's the core inside part of the tree that really gives it that sturdiness from the inside out. And so we're going to focus on that primarily with our spine. And so I'm going to try to now feel either sitting up nice and tall or standing nice and tall. Feeling that sturdiness of the spine. And so I'm trying to sort of keep it straight, keeping my, what's this called? My chin. Keeping my chin right here. It's not up, not down, it's right in the middle. Feeling like sort of something like pulling the crown of the head up a little bit. I'm not trying to be like extra tall like that, right? Still a little bit relaxed, but feeling like that sturdiness of the spine. Each vertebrae is sort of stacked on one on top of the other. And again, if I'm standing just right here, again, not trying to be like this, but here and finding, okay? So from here, so this is that sort of static, like, okay, feeling that center line of the spine. And now to kind of help feel it a little bit more, we're gonna start playing with bringing a little bit of coming off center and back to find, okay, where is that center point where I am very well balanced? So if I'm doing this from standing, maybe I'll start to go to the side. I'm gonna lean just until I find that point where it's like, oh, okay, if I kept going, I might lose my balance. So I'm just gonna find that, it's like right there, and come back to center. Okay, I'm gonna do it to this side. There, I'm gonna do it back. Right there, and forwards. Each time coming back, and I'm trying to just kind of help calibrate where is that center, where everything is nice and vertically aligned and sturdy. Same thing from sitting, just finding the side to side balance points and front and back. Let's keep doing that for just a couple more moments until you found like, okay, here is, I'm like kind of calibrating, okay, here is where I'm really in that center line with that vertical aligned spine. Okay. Next. So do we feel, for those who have cameras on, thumbs up if this is all working so far? Great. Okay. All right, so now, just like yesterday, we want to find, okay, how do we kind of hold this sense of sturdiness? Not only when I'm sitting perfectly still, because that's nice, but we don't spend most of our lives sitting exactly perfectly still. We want to keep that sturdiness available to us when we're moving both literally and metaphorically. Okay, so now I'll show this from seated first and then from standing. I'm going to start with this vertical spine, nice and centered. And now I'm going to start to shift some things around. I'm trying to keep the spine vertical. I'm going to start to move other parts of the body, especially under me. So you'll notice if you're looking at my feet, right? They're sort of moving around, maybe making some circles. And so what I'm doing here is saying, okay, how do I shift on the hips and sort of where I am there, but keep my spine sturdy and vertical. So if you're seated, you're doing something like this. And then from standing, it's again from here, and maybe I'm shifting most of my weight onto one foot and noticing that sturdiness that goes all the way from the head down through the spine and the hips, knees, all the way to the ground. That's again where that sense of rooting is really helpful. I'll shift over here. Just playing, making different patterns. And I'm trying to keep the spine here upright and vertical. Maybe I'm going to kind of rotate around. And I'm finding like, okay, here the spine is this pivot point, this axis that I can turn around and maintain that sturdiness. Maybe then start to take some steps if you're standing around. Cool, and then again, seated, playing with. Here you're really feeling the sit bones are that point of connection to the ground and finding that sturdiness. Okay. Gonna add one more layer, and then we're gonna do a couple minutes of improv again, playing some music to just kind of do some free exploration of the movement, and then we'll end with some stillness. So the next layer I want to add on is, okay, this is all good and fine. Again, when I'm sort of moving around, spine is vertical, but I also want to have sturdiness, right? Like some trees, I don't know, California redwoods are like really tall and straight, right? Right? But some trees are like this, right? Like I don't know, like a Torrey pine. You know those pines that grow like high up in mountains and off rocks and stuff like that, right? So we all want to have sturdiness. That sturdiness is like in some ways even more important when you're sort of growing off of like cliffside or whatever. So here we want to play with, all right, how do I find that sense of sturdiness, even or especially when I'm in weird shapes, right? And this is here where we're saying both literally in the body, but pulling this over metaphorically. We're practicing in the body so we can kind of feel what it feels like physically, but then we have this sort of other sort of more emotional or psychological sense of sturdiness that we can tap into when we're more metaphorically in weird shapes as we move through life, right? So now I'm going to go from here and just kind of go from one position into the next and kind of hold it for a second. So here I'm like, okay, this is a kind of a funky shape. Can I find that sturdiness here? I'm staying rooted, feeling the rootedness into the ground, feeling the sturdiness in my spine and everywhere else. So I'm going to find that sturdiness, pause for just a moment, and then I'm going to make a new shape. Find that sturdiness in this shape. Move into a new shape. Oh, okay. Can I be sturdy here? Okay. Maybe I'll pick up a foot if that feels good. Oh, sturdy here, right? If you're sitting, kind of like, oh, can I feel sturdy here? Maybe I want to take a hand and like give a little extra support right here in my leg, right? Because maybe if I'm like this, it's kind of too hard. So put this here. Okay, here's some sturdiness, right? Oh, maybe, oh, I'll use the back. I feel sturdy. Yeah, so keep playing with this for another 30 seconds or a minute. Again, just sort of like pausing in a shape and finding that sturdiness. So you're only holding it for 2 or 3 seconds. Once you feel like you found the sturdiness, move into a different shape. And then another one. And another one. Don't forget to breathe. Notice sort of like where and how are you rooting in the body to help with that sturdiness? What are you sort of holding firm, right? And what are you sort of letting a little bit loose? And maybe find 3 more positions you haven't made yet. All right. So we have now made, I don't know, however many folks are on here, 150 something, multiply that by 20 shapes that we made. That's, I don't know what that math is, 3,000? Did I get that right? 300 or 3,000? 3,000 different trees, different funky tree shapes that we just made and found some sturdiness inside them. All right, so I'm gonna put on some music, and similar to yesterday, we'll play it for a couple of minutes, and I think I'm gonna play the same song. I'll maybe switch it up tomorrow. The same song. Oh, you know what? I'll just pick it up from where I left off on yesterday. This is All the Leaves from Batya Levine's new album. We'll put the link in as well later. So we're gonna play this for a couple of minutes. And the goal here is again, just like open movement, right? Use the song, the music, the rhythm, the melody as something to respond to. And we're pulling in that sense of rootedness from yesterday, that sense of connection, and also now pulling in that sense of sturdiness. So every so often, I'll kind of pause for a second, find the sturdiness, keep on moving, keep on moving. Yeah. So find the sturdiness, find the rootedness, and also just move however you feel called to from the music. Let me share my sound. And here we go. Staying rooted, feeling the connection through the full body. Finding moments of sturdiness. About 30 seconds or so, we're going to move into final stillness. Start to move yourself towards a position of stillness, whether that be standing or seated. And as you're ready, find this position of stillness. If you're standing, this might be right here, a little bit of bend to the knees. If you're sitting, this might be right here. And now tapping into that sense of sturdiness. Eyes can be closed or eyes can be open, but trying to be completely still. We'll do this for about 1 more minute. Really tuning into that sense of that heartwood, that core inside the body, that core sense of self, that sense of strength. Noticing what is it inside you that gives you that sturdiness to hold yourself up physically emotionally, spiritually. Take one or two more breaths, and as you're ready, we'll come back together. Right. Obviously, that was a very short amount of stillness. So obviously invite folks if you want to spend longer, more time later today in stillness or in meditation, please do. And I know we're right at the end of our time together, or of being in practice. So yeah, I will want to say again, thank you. I'm going to pass it back to Rabbi Josh in a moment. But first, just want to say, yeah, looking forward to being back with you all for the next couple of days, and being in conversation for the next 15 minutes as well. Looking forward to your questions. And we are getting ready at Mitsui Collective, my organization, to open an online studio which is studios where we really get into practice and be in a community of practice together, focused for us on Jewish embodiment, really bringing in what we call Mitsui method, which is our system of Jewish embodiment, kind of going more deeply into some more particular forms and frameworks. We have next week on Thursday, we're doing a free hour-long intro to Mitsui method. So this will kind of give more of those kind of foundations of what is the practice about and the different sort of frameworks to bring into studio practice. Registration is open now, and the website, you can go to the link in the chat. That's our studio page on the website. You'll see the registration link and also a bunch of information just on like what is Studio Mitsui and kind of what is it that we're trying to build. This is a brand new platform that we're doing. And so we're really eager to have folks join us and, build our community of practice together. So thank you very much. And Josh, back over to you.
Thanks so much, Yoshi. Thank you. And invite everybody to stick around if you can for some reflection and Q&A and conversation. And if you need to leave us, we should say shalom, farewell, and hope you'll come back soon. And right now, for those who are remembering anyone on the yard site or who are in their year of mourning, if you want to share a name in the chat, and then you're welcome to unmute and you can join me. We'll put the text of the Mourner's Cottage, thanks to Natalie. You can join me in reciting the Mourner's Cottage, so you can unmute and join me. Yitkadal, Yitkadal, Alma, Divrach,
Damiran Be'alma Vimru. Amen. Hey Shlama Rabba Shemaya V'chaim Aleinu Yisrael
Shalom Bimrama,
Osei Shalom Bimrama Hu Yisrael Aleinu Be'al Kol Yisrael Al Kol Yoshvei Tevel Bimru. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. So we'll bring Yoshi back here. All right. And Yoshi, I was so intrigued by the idea or the experience of finding sturdiness in unusual positions. Like it kind of built, I felt like everything kind of built towards that. And yeah, and just I would want to invite you to reflect more on that, like in this theme of resilience and sort of spiritual fortification, I think was the word you used for this year. That notion of finding finding centeredness even when we're in awkward positions. you wanted to, and obviously, of course, also anybody who has a question or a comment, please in the chat, and questions, if you can just label in all caps question, that helps us to see it. But just to get us started,
Yeah.
that was so, yeah, there was stuff moving there, so I wanted to hear
Cool.
what was
Yeah.
going on for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Both the observation in that question, yeah, that you shared. And I think so so for what I mean, I think that's the ultimate goal is like all these different ideas or concepts, skills, qualities that we're practicing, right? Like the skill of rootedness, the skill of centering, this like the quality of sturdiness. Um, Ultimately, like we do them in the embodied practice so that they're more available to us in day-to-day life, which is inevitably like there's just like always things going on. And so usually we don't like the times when we most need them are the times when we're like, ah! You know, because like I don't know, you're like I mean I have a 7-year-old daughter, so I often think about that, right? And so like when I don't know, she's like got whatever need that she has, and I have a bunch of things going on, and she's like, Dad, and blah, blah, you know, and you're like, blah, right? It's like that's actually when we most need to feel stirred, that sense of center, the sturdiness, the whatever it is. So that's why we kind of get into studio is so we can kind of like remove some of those just like day-to-day, like the hectic, the day-to-day like complexity and simplify the variables and say, okay, I'm practicing this skill now. It's like the equivalent of like for musicians, I like practice my scales, right, in isolation so that when if I'm playing sheet music, I can play them more easily, but especially when I'm playing jazz, right? That they're just right there at my fingertips. If I'm trying to practice while I'm already on stage, it's like, well, you've either practiced it or not, you know? So that's number one. And I think also just like sometimes I find in some of the different practices, embodied practices from different teachers or just contexts, maybe this is not, it's always explicit, maybe it's implicit or my own perception, but sometimes it's sort of like, sometimes I get the idea that folks are like, okay, this is not just a centering practice, but the centering practice. And to be centered, you have to take this exact physical position. And that's the only way to be centered. And there's actually lots of ways to become centered and to practice it. And B, what I think what's challenging about that is then that can give us the idea that oh, I can't be centered in weird, funky positions. So in order to be centered, I have to like maybe remove myself from the situation so that I can get everything set up perfectly, right? Or whatever it is. So like actually we want to practice being off center and then recentering, feeling unsturdy and then finding sturdiness, especially in the complexity.
Beautiful. There's a lot of really nice reflections that are also coming in here about doing this kind of practice. Susan notes here the practice of placing my body into awkward or uncertain postures and in a fluid way moving from one to the next was so powerful to embody what I have needed to do in recent weeks in life. Made a very strong connection. So that's wonderful to hear. I mean, I'm thinking about it like, my family was on vacation the last couple of weeks and international and all the airline things that could like go wrong. And, there were these moments when, right, I found it had been 5 years since we had gone on a international vacation as a family. And in those 5 years, my own practice has developed a huge amount. And I was very aware of my own ability to feel, sort of more centered as a result of practicing, right? And not get thrown by that. And so, and that's both literal and metaphorical, like you're not at home, you're in between places, I mean, it's all those things. But it's a great test, and you're talking about the musician piece. I remember there's a great reel of Yo-Yo Ma. I remember talking about exactly that. Like, I practice so that when I'm playing for you, I can actually be much more focused on meaning and performing and creating an experience for you, so that I'm not having to think about where do I put my finger, right? So a great metaphor for practice. Absolutely. Ron, I think, has a wonderful question here. How do our individual disconnections and lack of a sturdy foundation in our bodies change how we connect to the world, the planet, and humans?
Hmm.
Huh.
That's a big question. I mean, I love
That's
it.
a, that's a big
That's a
question.
great question. Hmm. Yeah. I think okay, so I think there's a few different examples and it's actually texts and teachers that come to me. I think the one I'll lift up is Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's an Indigenous American ethnobotanist and writer. She has a few books out. Braiding Sweetgrass is the most well known. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous book. Um, and in one of the it's sort of like each chapter is sort of its own essay that kind of most stands alone, obviously connects to the others, but stands alone. So one of the essays is about it's like about the relationship of folks of people who are not non-native to North America or Turtle Island and folks who are, right? And so she has this passage where she's saying part of the problem is that these folks who came from other places that she says they've got one foot is on the ground here but the other foot is still in the boat, right? And she's talking about there's like a lack of rootedness, right? Like people are like, am I coming or am I going? Right? Like, have I actually arrived here? Am I staying here? Or are they still, and I think for us, Jews as a diasporic people, like we have embodied that tension everywhere where we've gone. And I think there's no like right answer, but it's a really deep, I think to me, profound question. And so she kind of talks about like what is that rootlessness, and then what is the impact of the move of like individual rootlessness, but then you've got so many people with that, and that becomes a collective rootlessness and a lack of rootedness, lack of connection, lack of commitment to staying. And sort of where she ends up landing on it, because she's also asking this question of like, if you're not a non-indigenous person to North America, can you become indigenous? And she basically lands, she's like, not really. That would take like thousands of years, but you can sort of do this process of nativizing. And she talks about using again, inspiration from the plant world. There's invasive species that like compete and just kind of take over ecosystems, but then there's species that that nativize. And they basically find their niche inside of the new ecosystem. And she talks about plantain as one of those, where actually plantain has become really like beneficial and whatnot. So she's like, be like plantain, like nativize yourself, like develop your roots, find your niche in the ecosystem, and like things will work out better. Like don't be an invasive species and choke everything out. Be like plantain, and that's the kind of balance that we're looking for. Because also nature is constantly dynamic and shifting, right?
Mhm.
Like there is no perfect static like, okay, now everybody freeze. Like all of nature freeze. This is it. Be like
Right.
this for the rest of creation. It's constantly in motion and adapting and changing. So like, how do we do that in like a generative, productive way?
Yeah, yeah, beautiful. Right. And I think also, I would imagine um folks who have, have body pains. I've been the last few weeks been experiencing some lower back pain, and I've been noticing just like, what postures and and where it's more and where it's less, right? And you do that anytime you've got something in your body. I think we all do that. Like we start to figure out, oh, this position doesn't work so well, this one does. But then also how to, I mean, this is more the classic sort of Buddhist practice of like how to be um not resisting the pain that is like when that comes, also how to be able also to incorporate. And that seems to me that's also part of the balance that you're talking about too. I put the links, by the way, to Robin Kimmerer and
Right.
to Braiding Sweetgrass in the chat for those who want to see look into that more. So um, terrific. Okay, looking here if there's a lot of nice appreciations for you, and uh, yeah, just looking if there's other questions that
Mhm.
um, Deborah always wants to know if you've written a book. Uh,
Not yet.
Forthcoming.
There's a book inside of me, but it's, hasn't made its way out yet.
Yeah, that'll be that it's going to come one of these days. We
Yeah.
know. That's great. All right, excellent. Do you want to give okay. Yeah, and just a note, Elena asked me if we can leave the Zoom on for around 30 seconds so people can save the chat. So I'm going to give that note to Natalie. Natalie, if you can do that, that would be great. Anything you want to say by way of preview for tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say one thing actually from kind of a holdover from yesterday and then preview for tomorrow. So the preview for tomorrow, let me find my notes. Yeah, so tomorrow, yeah, so we're gonna, we did rootedness day one. Today, we did sturdiness. Tomorrow we're gonna go into flexibility and adaptation, where we're sort of, yeah, playing with that. Oh, I see a question, a private question where in Cleveland, I live in Shaker Heights. So hello, for other folks. There was a couple questions. I think somebody yesterday, or maybe a couple of people were we were doing some of the kind of connected practice and different things. I think a couple of people were like, oh, this reminds me of like waving hands in Qigong, and some different things. Also some things we did today, like, we talked about a little Tai Chi walking yesterday. So I just want to just like name that when I practiced martial arts my whole life. I grew up doing a style called Lotus Kaju Kembo, which is a hybrid style. And in the past few years, I've started really specifically studying Chinese martial arts. One, because they're great, and two, I'm Chinese on my mom's side, so it's part of how I'm kind of tapping more deeply into that part of my lineage. And so so just in terms of like that relationship to other systems and styles of embodiment and practice, I think something that we strive to really do is to be in dialogue and learning from all these different systems, right? And to really respect when we are bringing different kind of tools or teachings from those, but also we try to not like kind of like copy and paste. Right. And so I think that's just, and sometimes it's a little tricky, right? Sometimes there's some like fuzzy area, and then there's other times where we're sort of saying, okay, I'm kind of like deconstructing, like, here's what is this practice over here in yoga is about, or in Tai Chi. What is at the, like, what's at the roots of that? Like, what are the ingredients? So how do we kind of better understand that and not just copy and paste it, but sort of reconstruct something through our own lenses, Jewish frameworks, ideas, and concepts? And there are gonna inevitably be similarities because it's in dialogue, but also to really tease out like, how are we using it differently, or how does it look different? So yeah, so that's just something I think one is I try to lift up is like, let's be in dialogue, but also not just like take and appropriate. And also like you like folks will probably recognize like little like ingredients or spices or patterns or things, because of course like they pop up in different ways.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
All right. Well, everybody's invited back tomorrow if you can join us at that time. Everything is always available on our YouTube channel. And Yoshi, thank you so much, and thank you to everybody for being here. And we'll see you next time. Okay. Take care.